So my book is called Fire Under Ash. It's, I guess, a contemporary love story set in Delhi today. Well, it's told from three different perspectives. There's two college friends that grow up, that go to college together. They meet in college in Delhi. They're from two very different families. One is from a fairly wealthy family from Delhi itself, and the other one is coming from outside, from the province, so to say, from the regions, into the city on a scholarship. And they meet and become friends instantly because there's something that attracts them to each other, because they're so different, and at the same time both of them want to sort of break out of their respective family situations and social backgrounds. And so that's one sort of plot line that continues told through alternatingly through each of their perspectives. And then you have one sort of storyline that evolves parallel to that, which is the older sister of the Delhi boy who chose to go to New York early on, sort of for college, and has been settling down there. So that's her story at the same time. And the three stories all kind of intersect, and in the end, well, I won't give away the end, but there's sort of reasons why the friendship maybe can't sustain itself. Well, that's a difficult question. I've thought a little bit about that, because what you're asking essentially is a sort of a question about access. What social access does one have given your own kind of social background? And one thing I've always sort of felt with myself is that I've, for better or worse, always had sort of an insider-outsider perspective to sort of a few backgrounds, because I grew up in Delhi in a very sort of, I guess, sort of middle-class setting, and so my father was with the government, so you had sort of the whole kind of government world, which allows you access to several different stratas, I think, socially. It's a world that's quite mixed with different people. And at the same time, I went to a school in Delhi that had people from very wealthy backgrounds. So you sort of got to know that quite intimately as well through friendship and exchange. And then, of course, and I did actually live in New York for a bit, so I sort of got to know that world as well. So I think that it's never limited to just your own background, what you write about. Also, the same would apply to saying whether it was easier to write the woman character or the two men. I think as a writer, you try to sort of straddle as many worlds as you can. But yeah, I do think a lot about that question of access, and especially when I see sort of my peers, the people I grew up with, who I went to school with, and sort of see how they relate to different people. And I think writing is one way of doing exactly that, of transcending these different social groups, and of building up empathy, and of thinking from the perspective of someone who's different from you. I think that's what writing can do, and that's what maybe also why readers read, is to get access to something that they haven't experienced in their own life, perhaps. Well, I mean, I think part of the idea of having three different perspectives shows exactly that you're not looking at a story from one side. You're telling the same story, or sort of aspects of the same story from different perspectives. And so I think, in a way, they're all three outsiders to each other's story, of course. So that's one aspect. And then, I mean, of course, the boy who's coming from outside, he is an outsider to Delhi, just like the girl who goes to New York is also, to a certain extent, an outsider to New York. And the boy who stays in Delhi, I mean, what triggers the story at the beginning of the novel is that this boy is supposed to go abroad, as kids from that social background tend to do, for college, and he, against his family's wishes, decides not to, and he stays in Delhi for college, which is where he meets this other boy. And so he too, in a way, is an outsider to that world. This is not the world he was meant to be in. And in the same way, sort of, I guess, if one were to sort of extend, since you asked about my own outsider perspective, I grew up, my mother's German, so I grew up speaking German as well, and I also grew up in a very sort of local kind of government colony setting of Delhi, where I lived for all my life. So, you know, you always feel like you know that world very intimately, and yet you also know other worlds, and you also know that you will never belong to just one world. It'll always be kind of a movement between different worlds. No, it's not the same story repeated. The story moves progressively through the novel, and as it moves, we see it from different angles. So there might be sort of one or two scenes that you will see from different perspectives, but as as structurally the novel moves along, and you see as it moves, you see it from different perspectives. So it's not the same story told from 3 different perspectives. That's a different structure. Those novels exist as well. There are examples of those kinds of novels too. But this one is sort of, it goes along, and as it goes, you sort of see it illuminated from different perspectives. Well, I mean, yeah, without giving away too much, maybe the most important reason partly is because they are from very different backgrounds, and that sort of catches up with them. It's very much a novel also about sort of the social worlds of Delhi, and in how sort of pushing that to see how, that was what interested me to begin with, is sort of how far you can push that, and at what point you reach sort of a breaking point. And so that's one example. The other thing is they both end up falling in love with the same girl, which is always a problem. That might break the best of friendships. So that might be part of the problem as well. I think it grew out of a lot of experiences that I've had, even though it's exploring different things that interest me. It sort of explores how it's very much a story about Delhi and today's Delhi and the Delhi that I grew up in, the Delhi of the last 25 years, sort of how it's changed, and how when the economy opened, it really sort of changed the way people in Delhi sort of see the choices that they have, and accordingly make new choices that weren't made before. And yet to see what actually didn't change, or maybe what happened that made this even more sort of urgent and problematic also.